Well, hello, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Councilmember Sanchez is en route to home where she'll join us by Zoom from being at the legislature. So clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez. Willets.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. So the first topic of today is the Cross Disability Task Force. We've got Sierra here to give a presentation. I want to say thanks to the group of residents that came together and advised us on and helped create a report that Sierra is here to discuss. There are recommendations that have been brought forward to help us meet our goals of truly being a city for everyone. So as we look internally at what we need to do, externally within the community, what we ought to do to ensure that everybody can participate fully, and really looking forward to the report. And just want to say thank you to the group of residents that really put together great recommendations for us to think about how we move forward as a city.
All right, Madam Mayor and City Council members, today I will be covering more information regarding our Disability Task Force, progress we've accomplished so far, and what steps we are taking regarding their recommendations. To be inclusive, I've arranged ASL interpretation for our deaf and hard of hearing community members. Additionally, I will be giving this presentation so people who are blind or have visual impairments.
Sierra, sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure that our interpreter is on the screen. You were until the slideshow came up. So if we could get a camera. She's up, great. We just can't see it, but the live feed can see it. See her, sorry. Okay, so the screen's working, great, okay.
Thank you so much for checking on that. So additionally, I'll be giving this presentation so people who are blind or have visual impairments have equal access. With this in mind, my name is Sierra Garachana. I'm a white Hispanic woman in my early 30s with brown hair, and today I'm wearing a purple dress. This slide depicts the city of Boise's mission, which is to create a city for everyone by embracing our community in the decision-making process, innovating and investing to protect our environment, and ensuring a thriving local economy for all. The core of accessibility work and the goal of this task force was to better the lives of people with disabilities and reach towards that barrier-free access. This ties us directly to a city for everyone by embracing those with lived experience in the process. To give some more context behind my work and the task force, I wanted to briefly touch on the duties of my role. My role was recently retitled from ADA coordinator to community accessibility manager to reflect the city's goal of going beyond compliance. I still manage the city's legal obligations with the ADA and investigate complaints of disability discrimination. The vast majority of my work is to lead in creating welcoming spaces and inclusive operations so people with disabilities can live, work, and recreate equally. The heart of this work is ensuring alignment of creating a city for everyone by upholding the value, nothing about us without us. This slide depicts Diana walking with her guide dog on a trail in the Boise foothills while holding a white cane. Building off the goal to go above compliance under Mayor McLean's direction, I was asked to put together a task force to hear from our community leaders and how the city might be able to positively impact livability beyond compliance. The city housed an accessible parking committee that began in 2017 to provide recommendations regarding ADA parking, especially in our downtown core. As my compliance work progressed and the community recognized an accessibility resource in the city, it became common for the scope of the committee to drift beyond parking. A holistic approach to encompass more aspects of life and their lived experience was recognized and asked for. Therefore, the city sunsetted the APC in mid-2021 in hopes to create a newer, broader scope committee with parking as a subset.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sierra, is this a good time for a question regarding this specific task force? Or should I save it for the end? What would you prefer?
How about the end? Would that be okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Depicted on this slide is Jeremy sitting in his wheelchair on a trail with trees on each side and a hill in the background. Throughout my work, I have met fantastic leaders in this space, including our 6 task force members. Collectively, they provided 8 recommendations spanning from transportation to trail accessibility, as well as other multiple aspects of life in Boise. With these 8 recommendations in hand, I've evaluated with Mayor's Office staff where the city could take immediate action and which recommendations require more planning and exploration. As the task force concluded in October, I'd like to cover our progress so far and next steps regarding implementation of the recommendations. I've broken things down by timeframes and we'll begin with near-term work, 1 to 6 months. The picture on this slide is a view down a sidewalk on Idaho Street in downtown Boise in summer. Patrons are seated at a patio and people are walking along the sidewalk. So often accessibility in design is an afterthought. I've witnessed and heard this in watching folks who use a wheelchair accessible van try to park just right so their ramp didn't hit the tree or luminaire stationed in the access aisle on the sidewalk. PDS staff introduced the scope of the rewrite project to the task force in November. Draft Module 2 codes were recently released. The task force will reconvene with PDS staff to provide specific recommendations later this month as part of the project's community engagement. This will help us ensure we've prioritized accessibility in our new codes. To continue the work of this task force and realize an accessible city, task force members felt strongly about the City Housing a Disability Commission. Currently, we are researching sister cities as well as others who already house a similar commission. An additional idea is to also infuse people with disabilities into existing committees and commissions to bring in accessibility throughout city operations. Research will conclude and staff will provide a recommendation about forming a commission by May of this year. The 7th recommendation provided by the task force was an accessibility webpage to help centralize information rather than clicking through multiple departments and web pages. Ideally, this webpage will be found by searching ADA from our homepage. The structure and content of the website are still in the planning stage. Parks and Rec staff have begun compiling information from parks, such as the accessible beach entrance to Esther Simplot Pond, accessible play equipment and fall material at our playgrounds, ADA parking, accessible picnic tables, and more. They hope to have a draft of their department resources by the end of this month. Midterm work, 6 to 12 months. On this slide is a picture of a man traveling down the Greenbelt in early fall, riding in a seated 3-wheel cycle. In conversations with the task force and in my work investigating complaints, disability etiquette often comes up. This recommendation is still in planning stages as we map out a strategy to encompass all our community members and businesses in this educational campaign. Specific issues raised by task force members regarding this recommendation included difficulties with e-scooters, both in parking and high speeds, lack of community knowledge regarding navigation needs for those with disabilities, general trail etiquette, and keeping pathways like sidewalks clear. This work would be fantastic to partner with other groups and agencies, especially in our downtown. This slide shows a woman seated at a desk, facing a computer, wearing a headset and communicating via American Sign Language. Expanding effective communications for our neighborhood associations was the second highest priority from our task force. In speaking with our Energize Our Neighborhoods program manager, we would like to allocate $5,000 for accommodations as a starting point. This accommodations fund could be used for effective communication for people with disabilities, as well as interpretation and translation for spoken languages. Additionally, we are infusing accessibility questions and upcoming engagements to better understand what is most needed. We are compiling resources to fulfill accommodation requests and updating our toolkit to incorporate additional resources. Lastly, long-term work, which is 12 to 36 months. The task force's top recommendation was to see accessible, on-demand transportation, especially for those who use wheelchairs. An idea staff had was exploring the possibility of expanding existing services with our local hospitals. However, these vehicles are branded in medical insignia, and a critical component of the task force wished to avoid was the stigma of medical transport. An additional idea was utilizing the city's accessible bus operated by the Parks and Rec team. However, that bus is in high demand for our Adventure program and would significantly disrupt their operations. VRT currently operates the Access bus system and taxi script. This system is in high demand with the community. As a service with supporting operations already existing, I recently met with VRT's operations director to further discuss the possibility of expanding their existing services and how we might partner in this work. Given no immediate solutions are present, staff will continue to explore partnerships and possible ways to support the creation of accessible on-demand transportation. As one member of the task force stated, trail accessibility is not necessarily an exact equation, but more of a continuum. She described it as giving everyone the dignity to choose their own risk level. If someone felt comfortable traversing larger rocks or steeper inclines, such as the picture on the far left, which shows a black and white dog standing on a trail with a nearby fence, they could. Or if someone needed a flat, smoother trail, such as the top right picture, which shows Dana using a wheelchair being accompanied by two friends and their two dogs on a gravel trail, they could as well. It's all about information ahead of time and options. For someone who uses a wheelchair for mobility, thick sand can be discouraging, such as the bottom right picture, a picture of Dana with two women immobilized on a sandy trail near Camel's Back. In speaking with Ridge to River staff, we would like to pilot accessibility in some trails in the military reserve area. The military reserve is on an access bus route for those who need transportation. There is a variety of sun, shade, and birding in this area. Additional strategizing and planning with staff to devise potential plans will take place soon. Spanning the width of the slide is a screenshot of the updated Ridge to Rivers website detailing accessible trail options. Staff have begun the remodel and improvements to the Ridge to Rivers Accessible Trails website page. I've screenshotted a portion of the live page here. We've broken down trails by location, added in parking information, even if we don't currently have ADA parking at that trailhead, created more robust trail descriptions, added some pictures of specific trails, identified lengths of trails, slope grade approximation, surface material, and more to give folks dignity of choice. We've received very positive feedback regarding these updates. Staff training was determined as the least priority recommendation, as the task force understands the broad needs this entails and it being an evolving target. 2 trainings have and will take place soon. posting accessible social media content, specifically for those who use screen readers, and an introduction to website accessibility. Both trainings will be recorded to house as additional resources for all current and future staff. This recommendation is perfect to couple with my other work in creating our ADA transition plan. A holistic approach to staff training will be organized and cover a wide variety of topics such as disability etiquette, how to arrange accommodations, training our first responders for best practices, and assisting people with disabilities in an emergency or traffic stop. This concludes my presentation. I'll echo what the mayor was saying beforehand. A huge kudos and thank you to all of our task force members who have had immense dedication and time in this work. So with that, we'll go ahead and open with questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sierra, for that update. I know that expanding the scope of that committee was probably no small undertaking, and I really appreciate your work. I wanted to follow up on, because I was the liaison to the Accessible Parking Committee, we had kind of left off with some projects, I believe, that were handed over to Public Works around parking and accessibility. Can you give us just a quick update on where those projects are and when they might be completed?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Woodings, excuse me. Yes, great question. The projects were given to PDS, and then with Zach Pietmeyer's departure, and then COVID, it kind of sat. Right now I'm working with staff to find a project manager for that particular plan because it is pretty robust and would require a lot of partners. I have been able to infuse that map that Zach built with CCDC in their new projects to incorporate some additional stalls. So it hasn't completely stalled, but to be determined as far as like an owner for that particular project.
Great. And one of the other things that was the understanding of the Accessible Parking Committee was that there would be kind of a sub task force of the cross disability task force that was related directly to parking. Was that part of it, or was that not ever, did that not become part of it?
Yes, so Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, yes, that was their goal in the ask of a disability commission, was recognizing that we would keep parking and that momentum with that particular work in addition to the other.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Madam Mayor, this is Councilmember Halliburton. I've got a couple of questions. The first one's on the accessible taxi and ride share. I think that was identified as maybe the top priority. And my question is the issue that we don't have the ability to regulate rideshare as a city? And then kind of the follow-up is, are there things that other cities are doing effectively to address this?
So yes,
And
Councilmember,
Sierra, in answering that question, could you give a little background on the issue, the concern that now there aren't the taxis available that used to be available?
yeah. Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton. So in doing research to try to vet this particular recommendation, I reached out to about a dozen current taxi owners. COVID has really struck them hard. Most of them are one human operators, drivers, managers, and owners. They're having a tough time finding enough business with their car right now, let alone operating an additional van. A wheelchair accessible van can only house 2 to 3 people tops, versus their current vehicle, they might be able to get 6. So as much as some of them really felt for us, it was a tough business case for them, and they're trying to survive right now. So as far as other cities, I learned yesterday that, and this just isn't the case for us, we don't have a big taxi company. I think Jamie probably knows too, but most of them are 1 to 2 car operations, that we only have maybe one that has more than 10 vehicles. Other cities have code, if you operate more than 10, a certain percentage of those need to be accessible vans. So that's something we could, but in our city, we just don't have that big of a operation right now.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton again. Yeah, I appreciate the explanation there. I was kind of wondering, what other folks were doing and what sort of the difference was, and that does make sense. And also, the outline that you had in the memo was really good as well. My second question is with the trail accessibility and understanding that there are certain trails that we already have that are better than others, certain ones that can be improved. I'm wondering if the task force is asking for kind of accessible trails at an entry level, like at our parks, or are they also asking for like adapted mountain bike trails? I know that we have nonprofits in the community that have helped build them around Soldier Mountain, and other ski resorts sometimes have those as well. Is that an additional ask, or is it more of the entry trails from the parks?
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Halliburton, it's more of like that entry level. Essentially, can someone drive, 20 minutes to our foothills like everybody else does and go for a walk, hike, knowing that disability is a continuum. Somebody in a wheelchair needs something different than somebody with a guide dog. So giving options. Right now, we have some that are maybe more friendly, but they're not looped. A lot of them are very short. So for some folks, it takes 2 hours to get dressed, ready into a trail just to have a 10-minute walk. So kind of having more loops, better parking, but just more entry-level options. Essentially, the mountain bike adaptive trails are pretty solid right now and not what this particular task force has asked for.
Great. And then Madam Mayor, just the final comment there. Boise really does have one of the greatest mountain biking systems as far as being close to downtown of almost any city across the country. I'm not sure if we do have any specific mountain bike trails that are built for adapted bikes. I could be wrong in that, but it would be wonderful to make sure that we do, when we're looking at future construction of trails, look at the possibility of adding some trails specifically made for adapted mountain bikes, because I know that that's a large community that we have here.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, thank you so much. And I think I'll bring that to this task force. And I think you might have hit something that they might be interested too.
Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Let's go with Councilman Bajent and then Councilmember Willetts.
This is Councilmember Bajan. Councilmember Halliburton asked the main question I had about ride shares. And so I really appreciated your splendid answer. It made it clear. And I just want to thank you. City for Everyone means everyone. And I really appreciate this update.
Thank you.
Councilmember Willetts.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question, Sierra, just to better understand. When you talk about, and I really like this phraseology about the dignity of choice in terms of trails, are you talking about adapting some trails or doing better signage so that folks know what they're about to experience? Or maybe it's both. Educate me on that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, it's a little bit of both. Signage, but I think right now the biggest hurdle we're hitting is more of that, and where I would like to start with staff, it's wheelchair accessible trails. It doesn't mean paving them, but sloper, like flatter areas. The trail mix is a big component. So large chunky gravel, or as you saw, too much sand really kind of impedes folks. So having a shorter, little bit longer option infused to what we have existing, we want to be delicate and cognizant of people love our foothills, and we have lots of stakeholders. So looping up with Ridge to River staff of what do we existently have, we could loop together or re-sign. Signage will probably help a bunch in our etiquette issues. So it's a continuum and kind of a gray answer in the middle, if that helps you.
That does. Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
thank you. Well, thanks for this presentation. It's great to get this update. I wanted to follow up on the rideshare question and just make you aware that Valley Regional Transit has recently contracted with an organization called Via Transit, and they are a van focused rideshare program. And I wonder if it might offer some opportunities for us. So I just wanted to make you aware of that if you weren't, first of all. And then my questions are this, twofold. Well, I guess one more comment. On the accessible trails, having done a lot of work in other communities on trail projects and accessibility, I know that we found that there's a particular product, typically when rock is added to a trail, we think of it as gravel, and gravel is typically river rolled rock, and so it's rounded, doesn't hold together very well. Aggregate that is fractured can be fractured in many different sizes and compacted, and it actually stays in place. So I don't know if you've explored that, but I do know that a couple of other communities around the state are working to do some of that compacted, small fractured rock on some of their trail systems. So just FYI. And then my question is this: you mentioned a $5,000 ask. I wasn't sure if you were asking us or if there had already been money identified in one of the department budgets, or if you're asking us to consider that in the next budget build.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Clegg, so the $5,000 for effective communication accommodations, that money exists. It's just a matter of allocations in our Energizer program funding. So no ask for additional funds, just an explanation of kind of where we're parsing some of that money to.
Okay, thank you. I thought that's what it was. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us an update, and look forward to, it sounds like we'll hear from you again once you finish the research on some of the recommendations, and we look forward to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for us. All right. Next up, we have, are there three of you? Hey there. I saw Sarah and Doug coming in. Next up, we have the pesticide program, right? Great. So we've got the whole parks crew here right now. This program came at the request of council and our office to look at if we could and how we could reduce pesticide usage in our parks. And there are health implications. Our residents are interested in us taking these steps. And then of course this leads into our climate action goals as well. And so really looking forward to hearing how it went, because my sense is that it went well, and now we need to think about how we can bring this to scale, or if we can bring it to scale and where. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Madam Mayor, City Council. Yeah, I would say, one distinction to make is that it has gone well and it is still going. So that's what I'll talk about here today. But thank you for having me in here to talk about our efforts on pesticide reduction. I'm really excited to do that. It's been a huge project for me over the last 2 years. And so I'm really excited about the way it's going. I'll start by giving you an overview of where we've been with the pesticide reduction pilot program. So that is a program that we started in 2020. And the goal of that program was to identify potential reduction routes for pesticides at a handful of parks that we chose to be our pilot sites. The end sort of vision for this was to have all of our uses at those sites be defensible, justifiable uses that are grounded in the latest science around land management, basically. So it was originally started as a 2-year program. So you're right in thinking that we would be culminating now. This last year, we made the decision because of the circumstances surrounding 2020, and we weren't able to really implement everything we wanted to in 2020 because of staffing issues and other things happening. We decided to extend it for another year. So we would have been making changes, maintenance changes, and implementing different cultural methods at those pilot sites over the growing seasons of 2020 and 2021. Moving into policy changes at the end of 2021 that we would be implementing this next year. We've extended that for another year, so we want to make some more changes to our maintenance efforts in this next year, moving into policy changes at the end of the growing season of 2022 that will be implemented in 2023. So this is a map showing our original pilot sites. We tried really hard to get a good distribution, both geographically across the city and get all of our different land uses in there. So we achieved that pretty well. We have some of our larger sites in the downtown core. We have a lot of our neighborhood parks. We have some parks with sports fields, that kind of thing. We also have some of our right-of-ways, pathways down here on the bottom. One interesting thing to note is a couple of these sites, both Memorial Park and Boise Hills Park, were added by community suggestion. And we really appreciated that community support early on for the program. So we came up with a specific plan for each of the pilot sites. You can see in here we had specific chemicals that we wanted to reduce at each site. Along with sort of implementation goals, how we are going to reduce those chemical loads on the site. I think this is a good spot to sort of talk about the fact that glyphosate reduction was really the impetus for a lot of this. So glyphosate, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a broad spectrum herbicide. And it has been linked with some human health concerns, and it's the active ingredient in Roundup. For those who aren't familiar with it, there's a lot to say on the glyphosate issue, and I'd be happy to go into that, but maybe at a later time if you're interested in it. It's been a sort of a hobby of mine, following all of the news on it for the last 2 years. So, but if we were just focused on reducing glyphosate, I think that would be really easy. You know, we could just swap that for another chemical and say, okay, we've reduced our glyphosate use. That wasn't what we felt was the right choice in this instance. We wanted to reduce glyphosate by implementing more holistic methods in our parks, thereby reducing our entire pesticide applications at our sites. So these implementation methods, some common themes that you'll see for the different plans is increased mow heights, decreased mowing frequency, increased fertilization, increased aeration, increased overseeding and interseeding. These are some of the things. Oops. Sorry about that. So what was successful and what was not successful over these past 2 years? I would say our glyphosate reduction was very successful at these sites. We basically eliminated glyphosate from all of the pilot sites. We had one site in particular, Coomba Park, where we ended up using some glyphosate that had some specific things, and we talked about that a lot in our last pesticide use report for 2020. Another thing to note is our 2021 pesticide use report is available now, and we'll be including that in a Friday memo soon. But most glyphosate is used in our parks around tree wells. So that's the bare area of earth around trees, and on hard surfaces to control plant material growing up in cracks and sidewalks and around tennis courts and things. We swapped for weed burning for burners on a lot of the hard surfaces, and in our tree wells, we just allowed those to grow in. This has been really well received from the communities around the pilot sites, and I don't see any reason why we can't expand that to parks outside of the pilot program. So with that success early on in the second year of the pilot program, we decided to move to our insecticide use. Insecticides are another large use in the parks and recreation. We typically use them mostly for white grub control and turf. And a commonly used chemical is imidacloprid, which is a neonicotinoid. And neonicotinoids are a class of insecticides that have been linked heavily with pollinator decline in many ecosystems. And we really wanted to make a reduction in these. We didn't see any reason to keep this just at our pilot sites. So in year 2, we swapped to a different chemical. In this case, there really weren't any cultural methods that we can employ. So we swapped to a different chemical, chlorantraniliprole, which we changed to entirely last year in 2021. So we used down all of our imidacloprid stock, switched entirely away from neonicotinoids, and we'll be moving forward neonicotinoid free in the future. Increased mowing height, I put that in kind of the successful and unsuccessful categories at many of our sites, like on our turfed right-of-ways, at some of our outside parks, and some sort of lesser used areas. It was really successful. And I think we're going to continue and expand if we can. But when we paired that with lower mowing frequency, it led to an unkempt look in the parks that really wasn't well tolerated by the public. We got a lot of feedback on that. Part of that, I think, is just that a lot of the species that people don't like to see, dandelions, clover, those sorts of things that put on a flower, are very visible when you reduce the mowing or increase the mowing height and reduce the frequency. I guess I should also explain the reason we wanted to do this is twofold. When you do that, you increase the plant's resources to really make those deep roots, and that has the effect of making it more robust, so it can resist the invasion of other species better, so it can reduce your weed pressure. I try not to use the term weed anymore. I've been called out on that a few times, but anyway, that's and it also makes it more drought resistant. So, this also ties in really heavily with our water use reduction that we're shooting for in the parks. It's interesting. It's kind of a give and take between water use and pesticides. A lot of our very highly watered areas require less pesticide use, where our lower water areas have more bare ground. It's more susceptible to invasion by invasive species, plants on the noxious weed list, that type of thing that we need to use pesticides on. And lastly, I put increased fertilization, aeration. I should have put overseeding here as well. The only reason those are in the unsuccessful category is because they largely weren't able to be implemented in the pilot program. This is more or less a resource issue. Those are very time-intensive things to do. And I think without a larger systematic shift away from things like spraying and to these more cultural methods, we can't meaningfully implement them. But in this year 3, I really want to trial some things that will shed some light on how much time that will take. So just to recap, in year 1, we initialized the program and made our pesticide reductions and maintenance changes at the pilot sites. In year 2, we continued those changes and reduced our neonicotinoid use. So that brings us to this year. So in year 3, I guess I should explain this first. So these are our 2 most highly used chemicals, and this is stable from year to year. These numbers are specifically from last year, but 2,4-D and glyphosate make up anywhere from 1/2 to 2/3 of our use each year. 2,4-D is a selective herbicide for broadleaf. It's used on turf, and it basically takes out things like dandelion, like clover, like purslane, and doesn't touch the turf. So that's applied almost every year to every park that has turf in it. We have, from the previous 2 years of our pilot program, we have some really good methods, I think, that we can use to reduce our glyphosate. So the last big hurdle is that 2,4-D. So that's what I really want to focus on in year 3. And in order to see what type of time savings we can get from reducing that spraying, I would like to implement it more broadly than just at our pilot sites. I want to implement it at almost all of our sites, and following a sort of strategy that we have here. So this kind of leads us into the territory of some of the policy changes that we're thinking about implementing at the end of the program. But basically, we would take all of our applications and divide them into aesthetic and non-aesthetic applications. So aesthetic applications would be things like spraying for dandelion, something that is just done to achieve a certain look at a site. and that doesn't have really any functional benefit, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with public health. It doesn't have anything to do with environmental quality. Whereas non-aesthetic has some functional benefit. It is used to preserve the use of a site for its intended function. It would be a non-aesthetic application, something like spraying puncture vine or spraying white top or any of the other species on the noxious weed list would be considered non-aesthetic. And then we divided all of our sites into sites where we would potentially allow aesthetic uses. So those are on the top here, and sites where we would not consider allowing aesthetic uses. You can see sort of a group of types of sites here on the top. Sports fields, special events, and golf courses are all sites that rely heavily on aesthetics to sort of serve the function that they serve. So we put all those in sites where we would allow some aesthetic uses. Pools, that's a very specific case in this. I'm talking about just the turfed area right outside the pool deck. That is an area where we really try to reduce flowering species of plants to reduce the number of bees that are attracted to those areas, because bee stings are really a big issue for us in those spots. Right-of-ways really stand out here. We go back and forth on this, but right-of-ways, the chemical use at right-of-ways saves us an enormous amount of time. And by those, I mean our non-turfed right-of-ways that are mostly planter beds and our planter beds in parks. This is the decision to put it in an area that we would allow aesthetic uses came down to kind of two things. One, there's little human interaction with those sites generally. So some of the human health concerns are mitigated somewhat by that. And also it's a really hazardous area for our employees to work in. So anything that we can do to reduce the labor hours at those sites, we feel like we should do. So that leaves sort of our neighborhood parks. I grouped those all together for just simplicity here, and our open spaces. And open spaces is kind of specific as well. Nothing that we spray in open spaces is really aesthetic. It's all non-aesthetic uses of chemicals in our open spaces. So if we make those reductions, if we take out the aesthetic uses at those sites on the bottom there, looking at the numbers from last year, I anticipate that we could achieve about a 40% reduction in our 2,4-D use. Paired with the glyphosate reductions that I think that we can get from the changes that we've learned we can make in the pilot program, I think we're looking at about a 1/3 reduction in our overall use that we could achieve through these changes. This is probably a good spot to point out how this ties in as well with America the Beautiful. We're looking at a larger shift towards natural areas in our park sites. Anytime we replace plant material, we're always including some sort of a pollinator aspect, a natural area aspect of the new plant material in there. And so that will kind of work together with this to reduce our pesticide use, especially our 2,4-D use. A lot of the chemicals that we lay down are done intentionally to reduce biodiversity in these areas. We have a specific way that we want the parks to look, and we achieve that by these various methods, chemicals being one of them. So it's really trying to create kind of a cultural shift, or at least match, if there is a cultural shift going on within Boise, of what people view as a healthy park, right? So that's something I've spent a lot of time on with our staff. I see this is kind of the keys to a successful program of pesticide reduction here. These three legs of support, and I've spent a lot of time with our staff sort of trying to create that cultural shift, trying to change the way that they view a healthy park. Because I think when I first came to our staff with these ideas and these changes, they were really concerned that the parks would look unmaintained. And they take a lot of pride in the way those parks look. They're out there working on them every day, and that's really invaluable to us as a department and us as a city. And so I didn't want to leave them out or discount what they felt about the sites. I think that I'm there. I was just talking to one of our maintenance managers the other day. He said that he and his team were ready to make these changes to do this. He was just concerned that without these other two legs of support from the administration and from the public, that they would be seen as not doing their jobs properly. Speaking of public support, though, we have been gathering feedback throughout this, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. We do have some people who are concerned that it will impact our ability to control invasive species, and I've tried to make it very clear that that is not the case. That we will still take those very seriously and do everything we can to control those. We also have, a subsect of people who are really connected to the way parks have traditionally looked as well. So we have gotten some comments on that. People who really just don't want to see more dandelions, more clover, or anything like that in the parks, but they are in the minority here. And the last leg is support from the administration. I think with this, we can really do something very good for the city in reducing the chemical burden on our environment. That's what I've got. If anybody has any questions.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Daniel, this isn't a substantive question, but I just want to know, are you having fun with this? Because it really seems like you're enjoying yourself, and that makes me really happy.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, yes, I am. Going into this program, I didn't think I would. I thought it was going to be really difficult, and it has been, but it's been really rewarding.
Well, I think it's great. And I think that, a lot of what you talked about was finding that balance between what people expect our parks to look like and how we can reduce our pesticide use and all of the environmental benefits of that, and kind of finding out where that line is. And it's probably on a park by park basis. So I appreciate all of your work. I think it's really important. I think that as much as we can reduce our chemicals as a city, the better off we are. I think it's really our best day to make some areas natural where we can, and make sure that our parks are enjoyable for all users. So thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Just a second, we've got Councilmember Bajan and then Council President Clegg.
I had a bunch of questions about glyphosate in particular, but I think maybe they're so nerdy and you're so into it that I'm just going to give you a call. And then the second thought I had was, nobody wants to walk or play in a lawn that's just been treated with a broad spectrum herbicide. And I wonder if the public would help, it would help the public to understand the trade-off that we're trying to make and I don't know if this is reasonable to ask you, but to just publish our spray schedules so that people know, oh gosh, on Wednesday morning, this has just been sprayed. I don't want to go there. And that might help people start to think, gee, maybe I'd rather tolerate some dandelions in order to have better access to a park in a cleaner way. So, that may be really burdensome or really difficult or just maddening for the maintenance or facilities people, but I wanted to throw that idea out there as a way to help the public really internalize the same balancing that we're trying to do here.
Council member, I was hoping you would ask the questions because I wanted to hear you try to say that dionicotinolida, whatever it was, 5 times fast.
The anti-bee one.
That's a great point. And what we found over the years is when the posting is out there that the lawns have just been treated, we hear from our community. And that's why, Council President Clegg, myself, when I was on council, were asking for several years to see a pilot happen because of the response at the time that we were getting from the community as council members, that they wanted us to look at how we can reduce this for that very reason. So as Daniel was talking, I was actually thinking about, as we ease into this, and I appreciate the measurement you're doing and the goals you've set for the reduction. It's really impressive how we do that balance of reminding folks that, oh, remember you asked us to do this because of the health concerns you had, clean water concerns you had when you saw the sign. And so this is what it means. So it might be signage from a positive perspective, that these are some of the things that we're doing, but appreciate that. And you guys should keep talking about the science stuff. Council President.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Danny, it's great to see you. Sorry, I'm not in the council chambers with you, but for those of you who don't know, Councilmember Bajan is absolutely correct. We have a gem of a staff person here who digs in the deepest levels of some of these really nerdy topics and does a great job for us. So I wanted to just acknowledge that and really appreciate it. I have a couple of questions. As you were talking, I really am intrigued by the idea of playing around with the mowing schedule and wondered if you guys had thought about actually mowing more frequently and using less chemicals, and would that be a strategy that might be as successful as mixing the two? Did you think about trying that, or have you tried that?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Clegg, no, we have not tried increasing the mowing frequency. And honestly, that hadn't really crossed my mind. It would reduce just the visibility of the weeds. You know, I use that term again, but it would reduce the visibility, and I think that would be really good. Obviously, there's staffing issues. I don't think that we've had a full complement of our seasonal staff for several years now, which makes it a little bit difficult. But no, I mean, we could certainly try that at certain sites. We do have, I should say, we do have some of our sports fields we do mow twice a week on, and it is they are less visible, but just because you're knocking that flower head off more frequently.
Yeah. Anyway, great. It intrigued me, so I thought I'd bring it up. I have a couple of questions about I'm really appreciate the fact that you brought up the changes that we've begun to make to some parks and adding some of the pollinators and other mix of plants. And I suspect those folks in the audience who've gone to Catherine Albertson's later would recognize what a really big difference it's made there. I think much for the better in that particular park. So my question is, have you identified other parks that really could benefit from those kinds of natural areas? And in addition to pollinators, have you experimented yet with different grass mixtures in some of these places?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg. Yes, we have identified other parks. In fact, most of our new parks are going in with some consideration for pollinators. For instance, Bowler Park has a large amount. Bowler Park, one of our newest parks, has a large amount of open space where we will be managing actively for biodiversity and for pollinators. And that's something that's really going to be on our minds moving forward, and I know is on our design team's mind. And as far as I'm sorry, I think I forgot the second part of your question.
That's okay. Grass mix. So
Grass,
different kinds of grasses, maybe some more of the natives mixed in.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Clegg, yeah, we have experimented with some different grass mixtures. In fact, Boise Hills Park has a Xeriscape mix from a seed distributor out in Nampa, and that has been successful. The reason we did that originally was for water use reduction, and I'm not sure that we've seen much difference from a pesticide application or needing a pesticide application. But we have, I mean, Catherine Albertson's is a really great example of like a mixed use landscape that has both grasses and flowering species for pollinators.
Great, thank you, and look forward to seeing the results after this year. It looks like we're making great progress. As the mayor mentioned, she and I have been asking about this for a while, so it's really wonderful to hear how much movement you've been able to make. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yep.
This is Councilwoman Lucy. Daniel, thank you for your expertise on this. I think we're very, very lucky to have you, and there's nothing that I think people care more about is their neighborhood park and the places that they go. Couple of questions. First of all, when people talked about something being unkept, can you describe what that meant? Because it probably means something different to me than it might mean to others. And then I just want to get a sense of, our end result here. Are we saying that, look, we're going to lower the amount of pesticides that we're using in these areas, and you might see more dandelions, but you're going to have less chemicals? Is that simply put? And then sort of coach me through these two things.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts. Yes, so that does basically sum it up. We're looking at the reduction of our pesticides, and that will mean a different look to the parks. And that kind of ties into what you were asking about as what defines unkempt. And I think that that's part of the issue here, is that everybody has a different definition of what looks unkempt. So we are trying to walk that line a little bit by using fewer pesticides while still maintaining a look that people are used to. But when I talk about these changes and in that it will have more dandelions, more clover, it remains to be seen. But I somewhat doubt that it's something that a general member of the public would recognize as a problem. I think it's something that our people who are out there on the field and they see the parks day to day, they'll probably notice it more, just because you just develop an eye for those types of things. But that might be simplifying the issue somewhat.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I think I can make this question quick. I'm not going to ask you anything too technical. I think I'd appear foolish pretty quickly. I am interested. There were two parks that were identified that maybe it was the neighborhood associations volunteered their participation. And that's really, really interesting to me, because I love the idea of neighborhoods finding those parks and helping us understand the areas that they would like to pursue this. So I was wondering if you could just maybe talk a little bit about how that actually happened there and if there's potential for other neighborhoods to do the same.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton. Yeah, we did a lot of outreach right at the beginning of this to the communities, and we had two community meetings. One to propose the sites that we chose, and we laid out a criteria by which we were choosing parks for the pilot program. And it was through that process that in one case it was an individual, and in another case it was the neighborhood association reached out to us and asked us to include their parks in the pilot program. And I was surprised as well. I was really happy to have that community involvement, like I said.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, thank you. And thank you for the great presentation. Again, I find that just tremendously interesting because I do wonder, with all of our different neighborhood associations, some of the emails that I receive from them, how much excitement or willingness or wanting to participate in this type of effort going forward that there is out there. And I anticipate that it's a growing number as people understand more and more about how great it is to have more pollinators in their neighborhoods and in their areas. So again, thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next up, we've got Rebecca Hupp to walk us through some updates for the upcoming lease agreements at the airport.
Good afternoon. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm happy to have a conversation with you about our airline use and lease agreements. This is something that we have not done in quite some time, and it's fairly technical. And I may be just as geeky as my predecessor, but about a different topic. So let me see. Okay, you can all see that presentation. Excellent. So I wanted to go over our goals and objectives, what our passenger trends and forecasts are showing, where we are in terms of current rates and charges. That will help to set the context and then kind of give an industry perspective about where we're going as an industry, and then the specific terms of the lease agreement that we'll be negotiating and what the schedule and timeline is. So there's really 3 prongs to our approach to this. On the airport side, the airport as the facility owner will provide the local perspective and represent the community interests. Kaplan and Kirsch is a industry expert law firm that will address some of the legal considerations. Think things like indemnification, insurance, regulatory compliance, those contract provisions that have legal connotations. And then Lee Fisher is a group that will assist us with the business analysis and the business terms, because there's several decisions and decision points along the way that we'll need to discuss. So when we approach this, we always start thinking about what it is we're hoping to achieve. And of course, the very first thing is we want to make sure that our agreement is beneficial for the airport, for the community, and for our airline partners. And we want to make sure that we can address future needs, both the needs that we know are coming, our planned capital expansion, but also potentially unexpected capital needs. You know, if we see growth in a particular area or growth that we hadn't expected, we want to be able to accommodate that. And we want to make sure that we continue to provide a low cost environment for our airlines, so that way they will continue to want to serve Boise and add additional service here. So we want to maintain a competitive market environment where we can accommodate new entrants to our market and accommodate additional service. It's important that we maintain our bond rating, because that will help us to achieve lower costs for our future capital developments. Obviously, we want to be fiscally stable. We need to address future challenges. I mean, I think if we'd had this conversation in 2019, none of us would have predicted the pandemic. So we really need to be able to address future challenges, hopefully nothing to the scale of the pandemic. And then we need to modernize the agreement. It's been substantially unchanged since 2006. So where we are today, obviously 2019, we've talked about before, was a record year in terms of passenger enplanements. And we talked about calendar year 21, we were actually at 88% of total passengers that we enplaned in 2019. So we're seeing a rebound rather quickly. But in addition, if you actually look at the fiscal year, we're at 98% of our COVID enplanements and the land in terms of passengers. But when you look at the landed weight, we actually are experiencing a higher landed weight, which means either large aircraft or more operations. So while we know those things to be true, and while we've seen a downturn in 21, we expect that 22 will see returns probably to 2019 levels. And then moving forward, we expect that growth will continue. And I don't think that I probably need to say this out loud to the council, because you're all very aware, but our metro area is growing. People are moving to Boise, and the growth rate has actually increased since before the pandemic. And that leads to a number of capital needs, not just the terminal capital needs that we've talked about many times, but also a number of airfield capital needs. And I won't read these to you because I think we've talked about them quite a bit. But in addition to all of the terminal and landside improvements, we have a number of airfield improvements as well. So where are we today in terms of our current rates and charges? This shows the trend over time. You can see that our landing fees and our terminal rates have actually been generally decreasing up to the pandemic. And that's because our rates are relatively fixed. Our costs are relatively fixed. It costs us the same amount to move snow from the runways, regardless of how many airplanes are landing. So you can see over time, one of the key things that airlines will look at, one of the key measures that they use is CPE, and that is the cost per in-plane passenger. And you can see that those costs have decreased over time because the number of passengers has increased, but our fixed costs have remained relatively flat. And when we compare ourselves to our peers, these are just some of the airports that we consider to be our peers. we are well below the industry average compared to other similar airports. And again, I would attribute that to the fact that our lease agreement has been static since 2006. And the number of passengers has increased dramatically. So as revenue's gone up, we've shared that with the airlines. Some of the things that we need to be thinking about as we move forward, and obviously terminal rental rates will be one. When we calculate the rates, there's a couple of different methodologies that can be used in calculating rates. Our rates are set based on different cost centers. Some of them are things like our admin area, security, which would include police, aircraft firefighting, airfield is its own cost center, parking and roads are a cost center, and then the income from those are allocated to the landing fee. The terminal rent, again, we use what's called a residual, meaning that the airlines get a percentage of concessions that are offset their rental rate. And then the landing fee is residual, meaning that we include all of the costs and divide it amongst the carriers based on their usage and landing fees. Capital control is going to be very important as we move through these negotiations. Currently, we have what's called a majority and interest clause. This allows the airlines to have a say in our capital development. And the rationale for this is that in a residual model, the airlines are responsible for paying that cost. So the cost gets added into the rate base, and then they pay it moving forward. So they should have a say in it. Moving forward, we might want to consider a compensatory cost allocation or a hybrid cost allocation, where we assume more of the risk, but we also retain more of the revenue. In a majority in interest, the airlines have the ability to deny a project or defer a project. In our case, they can defer a project up to 2 years. We require what's called a negative ballot, where at least 66% or 2/3 must physically vote and submit a ballot declining. And in Boise currently, if they disapprove a ballot item, it's delayed for 2 years.
Madam Mayor, just one quick question. So that's with the majority and interest model, the airlines who are signatories or parties to it have the ability to require us to put like all capital projects on hold or capital projects that they object to?
That specific project that they could object to. So for example, with the parking garage, we sent that to the airlines as part of our budget and our rates and charges agreement for the year. And they had to vote on that and agree that we should build a parking garage. Another example could be, for example, if we had to hypothetically add more ticket counter space, and let's say it came in at $5 million, we would have to go to the airlines and say, do you want to spend $5 million to build new ticket counters? They could say no, and that would delay our project to 2 years.
Madam Mayor, one follow-up. So as airlines compete to be here, like, does this create a risk for us where an established or entrenched airline that has the infrastructure it needs and is maybe attempting to edge out a competitor who wants to come to this market, but then would be served by the capital improvement? Like, is it that cutthroat?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for that segue.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to get to some things that could be points of contention moving forward, and some of the different categories that we're going to talk about as part of the lease agreement. So these are some of the major topic areas that are covered in our lease agreement. Many of them are self-explanatory. Non-signatory and other, just to clarify that. So we have some airlines that are signatory, meaning they've signed on to the agreement, and then some airlines that have an operating agreement here, but maybe haven't signed on to the full agreement, meaning they haven't obligated themselves for the entire term of the contract to be on the hook for whatever the rates are. So our signatory carriers have agreed to the terms over the full contract length. Non-signatory, for example, Allegiant here is a non-signatory airline. So they could they can come and go from our market far more easily than the signatory. The signatory carriers have agreed to pay the fixed rates regardless of whether or not they serve our market. An affiliate airline would be, for example, like a SkyWest that flies for another carrier. They're an affiliate. They don't have an actual ticket counter here. They're part of another carrier. We talked a little bit about majority and interest already, and I think the other ones are pretty self-explanatory. So to Councillor Badgent's point, the evolution of airline agreements over time has changed substantially. Back in the early 80s, think just after airline deregulation, which I realize is a long time ago, we had traditionally residual agreements, meaning the airlines bore the risk, and as a result, they shared in the profit. In the 90s, it has been transitioned to more of a hybrid agreement, and we do have some hybrid components in our agreements. In the 2000s, continued shift towards hybrid or compensatory. Compensatory is where we take on more of the risk. And then today, most airports will have either a compensatory or a hybrid structure. The other thing, and again, this is just another graph showing this for medium and large hub airports, just how that's kind of broken down. And you can see that the vast majority, again, have either compensatory or hybrid agreements. So the terms that we'll be discussing, previously we've had much longer rental term agreements. We're envisioning this time a shorter agreement, recognizing that we have a major capital infrastructure program in process, and that we'll have hopefully a new concourse coming online within the next 5 years. So we're expecting to use a shorter term. And this is, again, you can see previously, there were a number of airports that had greater than 5 years. The trend is towards, 5 or 3 to 5 years. Some of the things that we're looking at, again, the calculation for the rate. But beyond that, one of the things that we have to look at is how we allocate the space that we have. Because even if we want to build a new concourse, it's 5 years away. And at many times our existing facilities are at capacity. And some airlines are using their gates and their ticket counters more than others. So as part of this discussion, we'll want to have a minimum use requirement where they have to use a jet bridge a certain number of times a day. Is it 5? Is it 7? Is it 3? I don't know what the magic number is, but we want to make sure that we build flexibility into our agreement. And then non-signatory premiums. So our existing carriers, our signatory carriers, enjoy a lower rate because they've committed to Boise for the longer term. Currently, our premium is 1.5 times that a non-signatory carrier pays. Is that what we want to continue, or do we want to decrease that premium and make it more attractive for a new entrant to enter the market? We'll also have to look at mid-year adjustments. We currently do a mid-year adjustment, and then airports will often have a year-end settlement where the fee is based on budget or projections, and then at the end of the year, there's a settlement where you look at what actuals were, and then the airlines either pay more or you refund if they've overpaid. And then also looking at how do we accommodate carriers that do less than daily service or maybe have a slightly different schedule and do a per turn fee. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. So going back to the residual versus compensatory versus hybrid, really, it's a lot of fancy words for revenue sharing. How much revenue do we share with the airlines to offset the cost of running the airfield and the terminal? Because they generate a number of the passengers. And again, this is a breakdown of airports across the country, how they do it. And you can see most have some form of revenue sharing. Capital control, this is what we talked about a little bit already, the majority in interest. So how much control do we want to allow the airlines to have? and how we build out the Boise airport in the future. And if we were to do a residual where they would assume the risk, what does that look like in terms of an investment in capital development? So if we were to do that, part of the thing would be every year we would set aside, you can pick a number, $2 million, $5 million that would be put into a capital fund. That would be part of that discussion. Same thing with majority of interest. You can set the level that they could have a say. It could be if you do a capital project that's more than $1 million or more than $5 million or more than $10 million. And all of those decision points will impact the strength of that majority and interest clause. And then also consultation clauses. So usually we'll have a situation where if we want to build a capital project, it can require consultation. Our agreement currently requires approval, but the agreement could just require consultation, that we let them know what we're doing, but they don't necessarily approve it. We've talked about this majority in interest quite a bit. The trend is going away from majority in interest, I think, for a lot of the reasons that Councilor Bajent alluded to. There could be times where it's not the airline's interest in the airport and the community's interests may not align exactly, or we may want slightly different things. We may want to have, for example, a higher level of service here for our community, or we might want to invest more in sustainable initiatives that maybe cost more, but we think that it's worth it. Or we want to add a new amenity or new infrastructure that would allow increased competition. Some of the other things that we'll be talking about is the allocation methodology. So how do we assign gates and how many gates do they receive? We talked about minimum use requirements already. And then if someone's not using the infrastructure that's been assigned to them to the necessary capacity and we have another need, how do we recapture that? And forced accommodation is exactly what it sounds like. If someone didn't want to move, but we had another carrier that wanted or needed space, we could force someone to accommodate that. So those are topics for negotiation and discussion. These are just some examples of the different categories of use. We have on our lease space, we have several different categories of use space, particularly in the terminal. There's exclusive, which means it's only for that airline. That would typically be, for example, a rental car counter. Preferential might mean they're the ones who primarily use it, but we could use it if we had another airline that needed to use it. So think like a jet bridge, you always land and you always, you take off from the same jet bridge in Boise on Delta. It's almost always the same jet bridge. However, if Air France had to divert to Boise because of weather somewhere, if we needed to put them on that jet bridge and it was open, we could do that. That would be preferential. Joint would be an example where we might have multiple carriers assigned to the same space, like a baggage claim. And then common space are things like the concourse, restrooms, the, just spaces that are used in common. So as we talk about this, it is a pretty lengthy process. We've started this process already in the negotiations with the airlines. We had our first meeting in January. We anticipate meeting every month with the hope that we will have a new agreement for council to approve in October. And at that point, I would be happy to open it up to other questions and discussion.
Madam Mayor. Thank you, Rebecca. As I was reading through your PowerPoint prior to the meeting, I was like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. And it helped me, like as a frequent traveler, it was like, oh, so that's why you go to one airport and they manage their jetways different ways, or maybe they manage their ticketing counters different ways. So that was really insightful. I appreciate the knowledge that you were able to share with us. And I wish you all the very best in your negotiations. I know that that's probably no small task to coordinate with everyone and to and to make sure that that's successful for Boise. But I have every ounce of faith that you're going to do it successfully. So all my best.
Thank you for that. And that's why we have brought in some outside experts as well, because it is incredibly complex. And while we may negotiate this type of agreement once every 10 years, the people that we've hired as professional consultants do this type of agreement multiple times a year, every year. And so to have their expertise is really valuable for us to see how they've done it in other places and best practices. And that's what we want to bring to Boise.
Very smart. Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Yeah, what Councilmember Wooding said, right, or the Council Pro Tem, this is so complex in a world where the future is certain, and then you have to adapt and adjust and maintain the flexibility. And so I certainly don't feel confident like pointing out anything that we need to emphasize, but I do think it's important that we maintain the flexibility to create, number one, the highly attractive airport we have to carriers now, because it's been so well run and it's so, low cost for people to enter the market generally. But then number two, the flexibility to use our space as we need to in the next 10, 20, 30 years to serve the people in the metro area. And so that's just so important that nobody can capture a piece of our facility or resource in a way that disadvantages other carriers, the ability to serve all of these things. They're in your slides and they're really important. And I don't have any like second guessing or suggestions to make because it's so complex, but I'm glad you're watching it. And I look forward on the commission and other ways to being helpful however I can, because I'm just really appreciative of the really good work that you're doing to make sure these things are taken care of.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I want to echo the council members' appreciation for the work that you're doing and trust in the negotiating that you'll do. You have long seen this airport, and since you've arrived, as key to economic development, economic opportunity in our community. And we've seen through your work in looking at lands that could be, best suited for like creation of industrial jobs, working with the land around the airport, using the HJR a resolution to build more opportunity here. And this is another piece of that as the airport's grown, is that now you're looking at how to ensure in the best interest of Boise while enabling us to continue to grow in the next iteration of what this airport will be. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for those comments. And I'm very thankful and grateful for the confidence and trust that you've placed in us. We recognize that this is a tremendous responsibility for the airport, for our city, for our community, and really for the entire region. And that's the key reason I wanted to make sure that council was briefed about what the process looks like, because it is complex. And we will be looking out for the interest of the city of Boise and our residents and our passengers and our airlines who are our partners. We'll be looking out for those things, but they'll also be looking out for their own interests and their own financial returns. And so we just need to make sure that we always enter everything with the focus that our interests is representing the city of Boise and the greater Boise metro area, and know that, we may not always come to the same conclusion, or there may be times where we don't necessarily agree with the airlines, for example, on majority and interest, but that we need to just recognize what the process is and why we're doing the things that we're doing. So we will certainly keep the council updated on our progress and keep you apprised as we move forward. So thank you for your time.
Madam Mayor.
Oh, one more. I didn't see who that was.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's me. It's Lisa.
Oh, Congresswoman, council member. I mentioned at the beginning that you were at the legislature advocating for our ability to retain our right to pass legislation around affordable housing and rental caps. And so it was recognized that you were there. Thanks for being there. Go ahead.
Of course. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Rebecca. And I just want to echo Madam Mayor and my colleagues. I think we all have a particular appreciation for the job that you do and also wish you luck in your negotiations. But I know how smart you are, and I know that you will find a way to also position in your work the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion as you do your negotiating. And so I just want to put that plug in because it wouldn't be a meeting unless I brought that up. So
Thank you.
thank you, Rebecca.
All right, great to see you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
We now have an executive session.
Madam Mayor, I move that we go into executive session. Personnel, land acquisition, records exempt from public disclosure, pending probable litigation, to communicate with risk management regarding pending and probable claims, labor contract, Idaho Code 74-206, 1B, C, D, F, I, and J.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Well, thanks, everybody. We will be back. We're going into our separate locations to Zoom in or Teams into the executive session. Then we'll be back here at 6 o'clock.